1975 was a cultural battleground. If you turned on a mainstream pop radio station, you were bathed in safe, sanitized disco tracks and soft rock ballads that offended absolutely no one. But just beneath that glossy surface, a darker, far more dangerous rebellion was brewing in the studios. Today's music industry carefully focus groups every single syllable to avoid cancellation. 50 years ago, rock artists were actively trying to provoke the establishment. In this video, we are exposing 9 rock tracks from 1975 that terrified record executives, triggered religious boycotts, and faced massive radio blacklists. And somehow, they still managed to change music forever. What's most interesting is that the song causing the biggest uproar of the entire decade did not come from a heavy metal band covered in fake blood. It came from a poet recording her debut album. Some songs become hits. Others become something else entirely. These are the tracks that modern pop simply cannot match. Number 9, Squeeze Box by The Who. You have to wonder what goes through a censor's mind when they hear a joke they simply do not understand. In May of 1975, at Shepperton Studios, Pete Townshend bought an accordion. He did not know how to play it, so he wrote a simple, bouncy track just to practice the instrument. That was the entire premise. When Ronnie Lane of The Faces heard the demo, he laughed and convinced Townshend to record it properly with The Who. It was meant to be an innocent, throwaway joke. But here's the strange part. When conservative American radio programmers heard the chorus, their minds went straight to the gutter. They completely misinterpreted the playful lyrics about an accordion as blatant sexual innuendo. Regional stations across the country blacklisted the track immediately, refusing to broadcast what they deemed offensive material. You would think a radio ban in 1975 would spell the end of a single's commercial viability. Instead, the opposite happened, driven by word of mouth and the sheer rebellious thrill of owning a forbidden record. The track sold over 1 million copies and climbed to number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100. It proved a vital lesson for the music industry. Censorship often acts as the most effective free marketing campaign money can buy. Audiences will gladly push a band track up the charts out of pure spite for the authorities telling them what they cannot hear. Sometimes a misunderstood joke is all it takes to expose the hollow hypocrisy of the establishment. Number 8, Emotion by Aerosmith. There is a certain kind of danger that comes from the outside world, and then there is the danger that festers right inside your own house. In early 1975, inside the record plant in New York, Steven Tyler sat down to write what would become one of the most recognizable guitar tracks of the decade. But this was not an attack on the government or a protest against society. It was a vicious, completely hidden takedown of the band's own inner circle. Tyler directed his scathing words squarely at Joe Perry's then-wife, Alyssa. The tension within the group was so thick and volatile that Tyler actually hid the true meaning of his words from Perry during the recording sessions. Perry was laying down the tracks, completely unaware that the venom was aimed at his own marriage. It perfectly encapsulated the toxic drug culture and bitter infighting that would soon tear the most dangerous band in America apart. The track opens with a sound that puts listeners instantly on edge. Perry utilized a talkbox effect, something Peter Frampton had popularized as a melodic tool. But here it was weaponized to sound like a demonic, distorted chant. It dragged you down into the grit of the Boston streets before the heavy bass line even kicked in. Peaking at number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100, the track introduced a new era of dirty, conflict-driven hard rock. It stood in stark contrast to the polished, upbeat pop. When you write from a place of genuine, unvarnished resentment, the microphone captures every ounce of that hostility. The heaviest riffs are usually born from the heaviest emotional wreckage. Number 7, Welcome to My Nightmare by Alice Cooper. Television networks in the 1970s had a very strict idea of what constituted family entertainment. Alice Cooper existed specifically to shatter that idea into 1,000 jagged pieces. Recorded in Toronto with producer Bob Ezrin, Cooper designed his latest project as an expansive concept album exploring the night terrors of a child named Stephen. It was dark, it was psychological, and it was entirely unapologetic. When Cooper brought this concept to life for an ABC television special in 1975, the cultural backlash was immediate and severe. Conservative watchdog groups mobilized within hours. They flooded the network with threats, promising to organize massive boycotts against any company that dared to advertise during the broadcast. The network executives panicked, terrified of losing their sponsors. They forced Cooper to heavily edit the special, desperately trying to tone down the violence they feared would corrupt American youth. But the music itself could not be sanitized. The title track peaked at number 45 on the Billboard charts, pulling listeners into its deeply unsettling atmosphere. It utilized a full brass and string section, blending the theatricality of a Broadway stage production with the grim aesthetics of macabre rock. It was an extravagant, sprawling arrangement that cost nearly $100,000 to produce. Think about that for a second. An artist spending a small fortune just to make the audience deeply uncomfortable. It laid the permanent groundwork for the horror rock and goth movements that modern artists still endlessly try to replicate. True terror doesn't come from jump scares or cheap visual tricks. It comes from an artist willing to drag you down into their darkest psychological basement and lock the door behind you. While Alice Cooper was weaponizing theatrical horror on national television, another artist was accidentally triggering a genuine moral panic using nothing but a book she read. Number 6, Rhiannon by Fleetwood Mac. A simple track based on a Welsh myth somehow resulted in Stevie Nicks being investigated by conservative groups for practicing dark magic. Nicks wrote the piece quickly in 1974 after finishing the novel Triad, but its true cultural detonation happened a year later. When the band took the music on the road, Nicks would step to the microphone and introduce it by stating it was about an old Welsh witch. She would then lose herself in the performance, moving across the stage in an intense, trance-like state. That was all it took. Religious organizations began sending hate mail and organizing boycotts, firmly convinced that Nicks was conducting actual Wiccan rituals right there. Under the spotlight, the physical toll of these performances was staggering. Her vocal delivery was so raw and unrestrained that she routinely lost her voice, forcing management to issue strict vocal rest mandates just to get her through the grueling tour schedules. Reaching number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100, the track proved something vital about the shifting dynamics of the 70s. Female rock artists could wield mystique and intimidation just as effectively as their male counterparts. Sometimes, leaning into the rumors gives you far more power than denying them ever could. Number 5. Rock and Roll All Night by Kiss. Here is what most people do not realize about the era's biggest teenage rebellion anthem. It was not born from a place of youthful defiance, but from a desperate, calculated business move to save a record label from total bankruptcy. In early 1975, Casablanca Records was drowning in massive debt. Label executive Neil Bogart literally begged Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley to write something, anything, that could save the company while the band was holed up in a cheap Los Angeles hotel. Conservative critics heard the finished track and immediately labeled it a dangerous call to juvenile delinquency. They honestly thought it would incite riots. But the truth was far more cynical. It was engineered specifically to sell concert tickets and keep the lights on at the label, and at first the master plan failed. The polished studio version completely flopped on the radio. It was only when they released the explosive, aggressive live version from the Alive album that they captured that necessary chaotic energy, driving it to number 12 on the charts. It created a permanent blueprint for the arena rock era, prioritizing raw audience participation over any kind of musical complexity. Rebellion, it turns out, is highly marketable when you package it with enough volume. Number 4, Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. There are songs that fit the mold, and then there are songs that break the mold over their knee. This particular track shattered literally every rule of commercial radio formatting, yet it somehow became the most requested piece of music of the entire year. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant built the massive arrangement primarily at Headley Grange. They anchored the whole composition around a relentless circular Arabic tuning that completely confused standard pop musicians. Radio executives absolutely hated it. The daunting runtime of 8 minutes and 28 seconds completely destroyed their meticulously planned commercial break schedules. But underground FM disc jockeys did not care about ad schedules. They started playing it illegally, and the overwhelming listener response eventually forced the mainstream stations to capitulate. Even the professional session musicians brought in from London were completely baffled during the recording process. The string and horn players struggled to keep up with John Bonham's complex, polyrhythmic drumming as he played in common time while the main riff operated in a completely different time signature. It was difficult, dense, and demanding. Yet it anchored an album that shot straight to number 1 on the Billboard 200. It proved that audiences were not just passive consumers looking for a quick 3-minute distraction. They craved challenging, expansive journeys. When you refuse to compromise your vision, the world eventually has to tune its ear to your frequency. Number 3, Death on Two Legs, Dedicated To, by Queen. Some bands write love letters, others write death threats. Freddie Mercury was boiling with pure rage when he sat down at Sarm East Studios in London. The target of his fury was the band's former manager, Norman Sheffield. Mercury firmly believed Sheffield had left the band living in near poverty while he drove around the city in a luxury Rolls-Royce. The resulting lyrics were so viciously targeted that their own record label almost refused to release the track, terrified of facing massive defamation lawsuits. Sheffield actually heard the final mix. He immediately threatened legal action against EMI Records. The label executives panicked. They wanted to pull the song entirely, but the band held their ground and forced the track onto the album anyway. You can hear the hostility in the opening seconds. Mercury's piano intro is intentionally dissonant and jarring, a sharp, ugly departure from his usual melodic elegance. It sounds like a man grinding his teeth in the dark, tucked away on an album that reached number 4 on the charts. It remains one of the most unapologetic and brutal diss tracks in rock history, arriving a full decade before hip-hop made battle culture a standard practice. Sometimes the most beautiful music is fueled by the absolute ugliest human emotions. Freddie Mercury was not the only artist turning professional betrayal into a venomous piece of audio. Number 2, Fame by David Bowie. In fact, here is what most people do not realize. The song that finally turned David Bowie into a mainstream American superstar was actually a hateful, deeply cynical takedown of American superstardom itself. Working at Electric Lady Studios in New York, alongside John Lennon, Bowie was absolutely exhausted by the machinery of fame. He was locked in intense, draining legal battles with his former management team and had grown to despise the cold, transactional nature of the music industry. He looked around at the plastic reality of the Los Angeles and New York celebrity circuits and felt nothing but disgust, so he aimed his pen directly at the soulless pursuit of wealth and the empty promises of high society. He crafted a scathing critique of the very system he was successfully operating within, and that is where everything changes. The profound irony is that this anti-commercial manifesto shot straight to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming his very first chart-topping single in the United States. To hammer home the suffocating nature of the subject matter, the recording utilized a highly specific technical trick. The distinctive descending vocal effect at the very end of the track was created by manually slowing down the studio's tape machine, dropping the pitch of the vocal until it became a sinister, distorted growl. It was dark, strange, and entirely danceable. Bowie brilliantly weaponized funk and soul to smuggle a subversive anti-capitalist message straight onto the glittering dance floors of America. Sometimes the most effective way to critique a broken system is to conquer it completely from the inside. Number 1. Gloria by Patti Smith. While established, rock stars were fighting over money and management. A completely different kind of rebellion was quietly taking shape in the exact same New York studio. It did not come from a platinum-selling band. It came from a hungry, relatively unknown poet, and it opened with a declaration so profoundly blasphemous that it triggered nationwide boycotts and fundamentally redefined the limits of free speech in popular music. In late 1975, Patti Smith walked into Electric Lady Studios and decided to completely hijack a well-known classic rock standard, originally written by Van Morrison. But she did not just cover the track. She possessed it. She opened the recording with a cold, spoken-word statement, telling the listener that while a savior may have died for the sins of other people, he certainly did not die for hers. It was a direct, unflinching challenge to the moral majority. The backlash was instantaneous and furious. Religious groups across the country were utterly outraged, demanding that conservative record store owners pull her debut album from the shelves entirely, while underground critics in New York vigorously defended her artistic merit. Mainstream America looked at Smith and saw a genuine, dangerous radical. But the controversy was only half of the story. The music itself was a violent rejection of the era's glossy standards. If you turned on the radio in 1975, you heard the pristine, carefully layered harmonies of soft rock. Smith offered the exact opposite. The track blended manic, aggressive energy with the intellectual weight of street poetry. It was captured with a raw, unpolished, live-in-the-room sound that intentionally stripped away all the slick overproduction, infecting mid-70s pop. It sounded like it was bleeding. This single, defiant interpretation obliterated the polite, comfortable boundaries of classic rock and single-handedly lit the fuse for the global punk rock movement that would soon follow. She proved that you did not need $1 million studio budget or a focus group image to change the world. You just needed a microphone and the absolute refusal to apologize. True rock and roll is never about being perfectly produced or sounding pretty on the radio. It is about having the terrifying courage to stand up and say the unsaid. Period. At 1975, it is abundantly clear that the most vital recordings were not born in corporate boardrooms. They were forged in absolute defiance. Today's algorithm-driven pop landscape might easily generate billions of digital streams, but it severely lacks the genuine, unpredictable danger that these artists carried into the studio 50 years ago. Music today is often designed to blend seamlessly into the background of our lives. But these 9 tracks survived censorship, aggressive lawsuits, and organized boycotts, carving out a legacy that easily outlasts any fleeting commercial trend. They demanded your full attention. We listen to them today, not just for the melodies, but for the stark reminder that music was once a place of real, tangible rebellion. Because some songs simply entertain you for a passing season. Others reach out, grab you by the throat, and define an entire era.